So welcome. We're just really here to talk about some kind of the beginner level advocacy things that you can do to kind of help with students or teachers in ESL kind of around the Midwest, but also kind of more greatly. Can we go to the next slide?
Who are you?
Me? Oh, I'm no one. Don't worry about it. I'm Andrew Lewis. I used to teach ESL at the University of Iowa. I've taught ESL for about, oh, I don't know, 10 years-ish at the higher education level, and recently kind of have gotten more into the advocacy part of it, which was under the, I don't know, wing of Adrian here and Elizabeth, because they took me to Washington, D.C. about 2 years ago, no, 1 year ago, to do a year and a half ago, I want to say. To talk with senators and representatives from Iowa, basically. Sorry.
And I'm Adrian Johnson. I am the Mid-TESOL Sociopolitical and Professional Standards Chair, really long title. And basically, we've created this awesome team here of Andy and Elizabeth to try and educate our Mid-TESOL members about advocacy, and that's why we're here today. I do just real quick want to pause and say this is a very broad presentation on advocacy. We'll touch on actual policy that was discussed at the TESOL level, national, federal level. If you're really interested in specific issues on K-12, there was another presentation we'll mention in a moment, but this is broad and all-encompassing for all different types of programs. So.
Yeah, and I think 3 years ago, went to Washington, D.C. with Adrian and met with senators and representatives and talked about advocacy. My name is Elizabeth Alt. I am a current 9 through 12 English as a second language teacher in the Shawnee Mission School District in Overland Park, Kansas, and a candidate for PhD at KU.
Oh. Yeah, so I think the first way kind of to introduce ourselves, and we're not huge in number, which is nice. We're mighty but tiny. Is that how it works? I don't know how you say that phrase.
Dynamite comes in small packages.
Perfect. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat like we just did, kind of what's your name, what do you do, what's your role, however you want to interpret role, I suppose, and then your favorite stress reliever. So what is it that you do, especially during these new and unprecedented circumstances we find are in, if I can use the phrase that we've all become accustomed to hearing. Just kind of put that in the chat and we can kind of get to know you so that we can do a little bit of an activity.
So I'll just pause for a moment so everybody can write in the chat. So welcome everyone.
Stress reliever of cooking, baking. Yeah, absolutely.
Eating. That's the best part.
The karaoke favorite stress reliever is a good one. I find that my going to bed routine has just become this long process because all I want to do is sit there and listen to music for like a half hour. So I'm with you. A lot of bakers. Needlepoint. Okay, we're gonna end the thing and just talk about needlepoint now. That's fine.
Yes.
Running and working out. I've been trying to go on more walks. All I do is walk around town, wearing my shoes out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome. It's nice to meet you all. I'm glad you came to our session. It's obviously the best session of the entire day. So I think the first place we'll start is kind of this idea that we kind of want all of our voices to be heard in some way. What we'll do today is really talk about how we can make our voices heard the most, thinking about the different scales of advocacy. Kind of not everything has to be, going to the White House and standing on the lawn. It can be a lot of different things. We'll also talk about challenges in the COVID era. We won't really super cover that, but it's more kind of highlighting one of our co-presenters and both of you, I think, right? 11 a.m. presentation. If you didn't make that presentation, it was recorded. So a lot of these presentations will be up on YouTube at some point in the future. I don't think immediately, but because it's a lot of work to get them up there, but they'll be up there. We'll talk about some advocacy updates from when Adrian and Elizabeth went to the Advocacy Summit this summer. And then we can kind of talk about what you can do to develop your own advocacy plans of action, just like individual kind of stuff. So hopefully we can get to that pretty confidently. That'll be good. Yeah. So again, yeah, this idea of the scales of advocacy, I kind of love thinking of it this way, just because it does separate it into things that, like, it makes things more actionable and it makes it feel a lot more accessible. It's kind of like the whole, I have this mountain of work to do. Well, pick something small and kind of start. So we often think of advocacy at the state and federal level. We think of like protests and letters to senators and representatives and things like that. Or we even think of it at the district or city level, where we interact with the government in some way. But in fact, it can really be in your own building, just like, what is it to be a teacher or someone who's existing in this building, and how is it run and things like that. But even just classroom stuff, what can you individually do to kind of give yourself control over the way that our students are treated, or the way that you're treated, in fact. So there's a lot of littler stuff that you can do. It doesn't have to be this huge action or this very scary action. It can be just like saying, oh, in a classroom, instead of, I don't know, practicing vocabulary by asking about boyfriends and girlfriends, you ask about partners, or you use something like that, where like that is an action that I think advocates for students in a way that doesn't have to be frightening or scary or really interacting with other people at all, which is.
And sometimes advocacy is just education, just giving some people some information or reminding them of their legal obligations.
Yeah, I would argue that, like, going over, like, I know at the university we'd go over syllabi all the time, and going over syllabi and saying what resources are available to you on campus, and just making sure that information is clear and available, I think that's a great point. Yeah, so it's kind of the scale of advocacy. Again, I love this diagram. So I'll hang it over.
All right, so. Yeah, thank you, Andy. Those are all really good points, and I just want to reiterate that point about advocacy is kind of what you make of it. So it's the level you choose to focus on, and it's also the comfort, and your personality is going to be different. Some people are very vocal and like to be around others and make their voices heard very, very publicly, and others would rather do behind the scenes work, and both are okay. So what I'm going to go over is, every year there's an advocacy summit in DC. This year, like everything else, it was virtual, which was actually pretty awesome because it was made more accessible. And then we had a lot more people join it because of that. So be in the lookout for that. It might happen again, I feel like. And so I want to talk, this is some of the issues that were discussed at that summit, at least touched on in some way. And obviously we're here at TESOL, so, you know, there's only so much that we can look at, but I think it's worth recognizing that if you feel stressed and overwhelmed right now, there's a reason, because these are really big issues. And each one in and of itself could encompass your entire life of advocacy. So, you know, whatever your passion is, we're going to focus on TESOL issues in particular, which does overlap with some of these for sure. But I think it's worth recognizing that, you know, if it seems like there's a lot out there, it's because there is. I will make a quick shout out. If you weren't on the Mid-TESOL keynote at 1 p.m., this one had some great information on advocacy related steps, specifically related to immigration issues. So I'd highlight that. So kind of here's where we are, right? Where do we start as advocates? If this is how you're feeling, that's normal, very normal and acceptable. Here's kind of where you start. So Andy already mentioned this. You want to stay informed. And that's really hard. There's an information overload right now, so you might have to pick and choose how often you get on and what your sources are and limit those sources so that you don't get overwhelmed by the news. Be very targeted in your attention. And then the whole reason you're going to want to be informed is so that you can inform others. And this is what we do best as teachers, is we reach out and we teach people. And it's the way we teach our students is the same way sometimes we need to teach our colleagues or teach other adults or politicians. Your voice is your strongest asset, and your ability to explain things is also very powerful. So,
and your experience is also going to be added to that. I know that I think when we met with senators and representatives with pre-COVID times, is that PCT, they took us seriously because we were educators and we were talking about actual things that were actually happening.
Yeah, one of the things that, you know, and Andy and Elizabeth and I, we've had lots of conversations on these trips, but something that I think people don't always realize is they don't like the policies that politicians are making, because, especially, you know, for education, because they're not educators. Mm-hmm. Well, they're making policies on healthcare, on education, and on immigration, and on foreign policy, and they truly can't be experts in everything. So they do really truly, while it may not seem like it, they rely on other people to give them good advice. Now, what that means is that sometimes you have to push through the crowd and elbow your way in to make your voice heard. And it's not always that you're talking directly to them. You might be talking to a staffer, but you can't diminish that because it's just as important. Mm-hmm. The other really super important thing that you have within your control is voting. So most importantly, as you look forward to what you can do in the next, 5 weeks, we're down to 6 weeks maybe, you need to vote. And those local elections are just as important, if mm-hmm. not more important than those national ones.
School boards matter.
Yeah. So one of the things that, and this is just a, I guess, kind of, again, to be inclusive of all the personalities in the room. Some people's voices and approaches to advocacy are different than others. And mm-hmm. so for me personally, this is kind of the approach that I take. The way I look at it is, if I know that I'm right about an issue and I shout and scream about it and I'm right and I know I'm right and I'm on strong moral ground, or whatever ground you take, but everybody closes their doors and windows and doesn't want to listen to me because I'm too loud, or then at that point, I'm still right, but I haven't changed anything. Mm-hmm. So some of what advocacy is it's knowing your audience and figuring out what do they care about so that you can connect what you care about and show where some of the common ground is. So I don't know, Andy or Elizabeth, if you have any thoughts on that.
I think you get to the point. Well, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was like, no, Andy, I was going to say, like, something that Adrian and I have really talked about is getting to know, kind of making every argument you make nuanced to the people you're speaking with. So how does this relate to Senator Moran? What is my classroom experience going to teach him, or how am I going to want him to act because of my interaction with him? And you learn to see how all of these policy initiatives are connected, and you have to know that, and you have to know that going in, or you don't have to know that, but you have to be able to make that connection. I'm really good at talking to people, but I had to talk to people I didn't like or agree with, but I had to find something that they were going to be able to hold on to and agree with me on, so that when I walked out of that room, I felt that my conversation and my continued interaction would be that. I would be that little squeaky wheel. Like, they might close their door a little bit because the wheel's squeaking, but I'm still there, still squeaking.
Yeah, I think it is a big thing of considering your goal, right? I mean, mm-hmm. if you really want others to change their behavior, you can't just like talk at them in a certain way. Or I know, again, working at the university, it was difficult to kind of get change to happen a lot of the times, because when you talk about things and you want people to hear you, for us, especially if it's our lives as instructors, you kind of know all the intricacies of how these different policies interact to kind of shape your work life. So when you get really down in the weeds to be like, well, it's this policy and this policy to these things, it's really difficult to kind of get people's attention. So thinking about kind of what you want and what your goal is. So if you really do want people to kind of change, make sure that you are talking or educating at their level. And I think that goes back to Adrian's point, right? We're educators. It's not necessarily just limited to ESL in some ways. It can be a lot of things. We know how to form lessons, right? And I don't think worded as lessons all the time because no one wants to be preached to, but I think thinking of it that way has really helped me.
Well, yeah. Well, an advocacy step that I've been taking is trying to get other teachers, at least in the city of Kansas, to become ESL certified. And that's not going to happen with a big district mandate right now because there's not the money. But if I can show them and demonstrate how this certification will help them do these other things through my own experience, and through that experience, I'm slowly achieving my goal.
Absolutely. Great points there. Okay, so here's just some action items. I'm going to stop presenting so I can click on some of these links. So I'm going to give you some links and places to go to find out information. So if you want to write it down, otherwise, if we get to a question and answer period, I can also maybe put it in the chat.
Three things, if I can just implore all of you here and all of you in YouTube Landia to do these three things, that is doing a whole bunch of advocacy, a whole bunch of work on behalf of your communities. That is just it's gonna be that domino effect. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, it goes back to like, where do you start? So these, there's billions of things I could put on this PowerPoint, but I chose these three because they're the biggest impact. One is a census completion. Now they're doing non-responder follow-up just until October 5th. But I did just check, and if you go to the census website, which is just 2020census.gov, you can still fill out the census. It will, I went through, I couldn't fill out because I already did, but I went through all the links and to the point at which you would respond, and everything was still working. So you can still respond to the census. You know, this would be a great time to push out to your ELs, families, or other communities that may not be, or maybe lower responding, to remind them to do that. I did check, and all of the mid-TESOL states have decent response rates. They're on par with the rest of the nation, but it's still a matter of, are we getting those smaller subgroups is still definitely a concern.
Isn't Idaho like 100%?
Yeah, I didn't see exactly, but they're definitely over. I think it was 85 is what they were aiming for.
Well, that's good. So, yeah, but that money, that census allocates money, federal money, Title I, Title III money, that allocates money for Perkins grants, that allocates money for work programs, GED programs, for OSHA. It is so important, and it connects to our families' lives, our students and their families' lives so much.
For 10 plus years. I mean, this isn't just short-term impacts. These are huge impacts for a very long time. This website is really, really useful, one to share. It's the aclu.org/voter/. I don't know, maybe I can, again, I'll put these in the chat. But if you click on, for instance, Missouri or whatever state you're in, it tells you all of the basic information you need to know. So how many days left? It gives you a link to check to see if you're registered to vote. And it gives you all the regulations in terms of voting by mail, etc. So it's a really kind of one-stop shop for voting. And I think, again, as educators, part of advocacy is making sure, and Andy mentioned this about the syllabus, is making sure people are aware of laws, are aware of resources available to them. Those are just really important steps. So there's also a voter registration tool on the TESOL website that you can look at and follow it. So it's TESOL.org/vote. and it does give kind of the basics. And you answer those two prerequisite questions, and then it gives you the form to register to vote. Okay, and then the last one here is about contacting your elected officials. I just gave a sample issue that's come up recently, and this goes back to being informed. So one of the, I don't want to say best, a good source of information for up-to-date information sometimes is something like social media, you know, and so a lot of these issues end up coming up first on, for instance, Twitter, and then they get publicized via people retweeting and growing issues, because a lot of this stuff happens behind the scenes. So like this is one that just came up a few days ago, in that, and I always try and pick the most neutral source I can. So this is Associated Press, but you know, in these times, I think nothing's neutral. But one of the proposals here is that they're trying to cut the number of refugees being admitted to the United States from 18,000 to 15,000. So these issues often go, like, people wouldn't hear about this information unless you're paying attention. That's how these issues work, right? So politicians on either side of the aisle make proposals, and if they choose to publicize it, then it will get publicized. If they think there's going to be pushback on it, they're not going to publicize it. They're just going to do it. So if you're not paying attention, then policy gets made and changes get made without anybody pushing back.
And a simple step that you can do is look at the legislation that the TESOL organization is supporting and just call your state representative or your senator and say, I would like you to, my name is Elizabeth Alt, I live at blah, 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 here's my zip code, and I would like you to support House Bill, oh, I should know the name of it, oh my God, Adrian, I'm so sorry. But that's a simple step. This advocacy center has many ways that you can reach out.
Yeah, so Elizabeth's right, and I wouldn't expect you to memorize all the House bills, don't worry.
I should.
If you search for TESOL Advocacy Action Center, and again, I can drop this link in a little bit here, but basically, thank you. What it will do is it will take you to this website that gives you a list of the high priority TESOL International issues that they're following, and they are asking members to advocate for related to English language learners. And so you can not only read about what the legislation is, but you can also, when you end up clicking on it, you can contact, it'll walk you through a process for sending a letter, a form letter, essentially, to your elected representative. So it'll walk you through figuring out who that representative is, and then it will give you a letter that you can edit, so you don't have to use their sample form. You can put your own information in, and then you can send it. You'll probably get a form letter back. But if you choose not to do this, the other option you can do is just learn about the act, like this Reaching English Learners Act, and you can call them. So find out, use the same tools to call your representative. And Elizabeth, I know you've had some comments on that one.
Well, I teach in the K-12 setting, but there's also action items, things that are important to the communities that my students reside in. And so I have found just calling, having their numbers in your phone, and calling consistently and trying to get, if they have office hours, which sounds like they're in a college, but if they have, and for example, in Johnson County, our state representative, she had roaming office hours. And so I would sign up for some time and go meet with her office staff here that's in Kansas. And I've met with her staff in DC. They don't know my name, but they know that, oh, there comes the ESL lady. She's gonna walk in and talk about the same thing. And it's just that consistency. And this is very up to date. So it gives me actual information from, I think, unbiased sources, Adrian, that are compelling to my argument.
And calling is a really good thing to do. I think Adrian was talking about this the other day, where it's like a lot of times there's ways to filter emails in a way, but you can't really filter my call. And I know before we were like, don't, like, you don't have to do everything. We're really just talking about calling people right now, which is a lot. But it's like practice using that muscle. So like you call once and it's weird and scary and I don't like it. And then you call twice and it feels a little bit better. And I don't remember when we were there in DC, either Adrian or Elizabeth told me it was like, they get a call, and this kind of I think applies to the state thing too. They get a call and they just mark down whether you approve of something or disapprove of something. It's not like this. They're not going to say like, why do you think that? Like they're not going to really like grill you on it, which kind of reduced a lot of that like cognitive load that I was having with that. So I think it's easier a process than you think it is, and it gets easier very quickly.
Yeah, the only time I've ever had them ask if there was anything else was because I called about the Reaching English Learners Act, and people had been calling about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and calling about other very pertinent, very important things that are going on in our government. So that was the first time I was like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what they do, honestly, they get so many phone calls. They just often will just tally. This person supports it, this person doesn't. And then in their morning meeting the next day, they give a report. 10 people called yesterday that support this issue, 15 people called that are against this issue. And so really, you know, as I like to say, if you're not speaking up, somebody is. So you just want to, it's like voting basically. So if you don't show up at the polls, well, someone else is showing up. So somewhere that tally is going to end up. So if it's an issue you care about, just call. And all you have to do is say, I support this issue or I don't. If you feel really passionate, feel free to give, your background on it. It's probably a college student answering the phone, so they may or may not have any idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, be nice to them. Yeah, and they were asking, has our position changed? I mean, if you call enough, positions change. And it's that drop in the bucket. We don't turn the hose on full blast with advocacy. That, again, going to Adrian, I could be yelling in the hallways. I could be morally sound in my argument. We know I'm right, but I'm just blasting everyone away. That drop in the bucket takes longer. I need all of you to put your drops in the same bucket, and my bucket will fill up real quick and will affect change.
Absolutely. So I put just, again, these are a couple of resources. I want to move to our actual action steps here. So what I'll do is I'll drop these in the chat, but basically this all goes to just staying informed. So these are some really, for different reasons, some really well-organized sites that have good information. These first two sites give really good information about statistics related to English learners, which helps support arguments of why people should care about these issues, and it's not just somebody that doesn't affect them or it doesn't happen in their town or whatever people happen to think. And then the Office of Civil Rights Data, this website, it's so amazing, honestly, because you can actually drill down to and look at disproportionality for issues related to how many students are enrolled in special education or AP classes or anything really. And then the Migration Policy Institute just does some really good, solid research and puts out policy briefings. So I'll drop those in the chat. Yeah. And then I'll let Elizabeth take over for kind of our action steps here. So just another quote.
Every great dreamer begins with a dream. Always remember you have to have that strength within. It is like, it's daunting to call, it's daunting to email, it's daunting to do all the things, and it takes up time and energy, and those are things that I am trying to put in reserves for tomorrow, for the next day. And so one of the first things we want you to do is make sure you're registered to vote, right? And creating an advocacy plan. So if my goal is to have 80% of the teachers in my geographic area in K-12 to have ESL certification and endorsement, that's my goal. I'm going to create this goal. I'm going to put in those smart steps to get there, those What does SMART stand for? Oh, my brain doesn't work today.
You got me.
I'm going to look at the context, right? Time, like it can't just say, I say 80% the next 5 years of these teachers will have this thing. Is this a federal issue? Can I get federal money for this? Is this a state funding issue? Is this a district level? Is this a building level issue? Each things affect each other at different levels, but it's important that we look at the context and how that will be implemented, how it will be received, and what action steps would be different at different levels. And then looking at your action steps. So if I want every teacher to be doing this, so how am I communicating this with teachers? How am I, what universities and colleges am I partnering with so that we can have this information? Where am I getting the money do I need money to do this? And it's not necessarily this linear process, but it's definitely, it comes back because you will move your policy initiative forward and you will see different obstacles. They might be more interpersonal than physical. And then, money is always helpful. It's not always there. So.
And I think sometimes resources, I'm sorry, I didn't actually mean to stop sharing that whole thing. I sometimes it's not even just money that is the resources that are needed. Sometimes it's voices, sometimes it's personnel, sometimes it's time and space as well. So I think that that's really, really important. So I think that what we would like to do at this stage is Elizabeth has a Jamboard that she's created, and I can put the link in there maybe. So to kind of start, to start to think about, to start to think about what your issues are at each of those levels so that we can go through creating this advocacy plan. So if you want to hop on that and share some of your needs at each level, and then otherwise I think we can maybe, as you're working on that, open it up to any questions that people have. I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment because I'm going to actually jump in and put some of those resources in the chat box that I promised. So if Elizabeth or Andy, if either one of you want to share a screen, you're welcome to.
I put them in there already. Those 3 websites, the ACLU voter site, the 2020 census, and the TESOL Advance the Field page.
Awesome. I'm going to put the OLO ones.
Our emails are on, like everyone's emails have been on the program. So if you click people's names, you can see them. And you can email one of us and we can probably send you those links as well. So that's good.
Got it.
Thank you, Adam, for telling me what SMART stands for. I appreciate it. I always forget, but I'm like, I know I do them. I just don't remember what SMART stands for. So on the Jamboard,
questions or issues that you, encountered? Any questions, situations that, you've wondered about how to work through? Just adding a few of these links here. So we've got a couple of ideas being posted here, it looks like.
I put the link to the Reaching English Language Learners Act. A lot of that is things that are near and dear to my heart, getting my loans paid off, just because I've served English language learners for X amount of time. And something that, advocating for at the state level is, especially during COVID, are these reopening plans and having clear communication.
So we have creating more opportunities for parents to learn English with their students. There's actually, what is it? It's the Adult Literacy Act. I need to find the exact name for it, but there is specific funding, and it's the funding for parent that would be relevant to your EL parents is wrapped into some legislation. There's a couple of places where it is. There's an Adult Literacy Act, and then I think it's WIOA, might be the other one, that includes some funding for education for parents. So sometimes you have to dig a little bit to understand where that kind of funding might come from, but there is very specific funding out there. And so when they look at, whenever you see something about cutting funding to, or increasing funding to, either way, adult literacy, often that will impact your EL parents, because that's where courses on English, in the evenings, for instance, that's where that kind of funding would come from, is those programs.
Something that, when the first time I went, they were talking about level funding. And so that the funding, inflation is happening and things cost more now. But if we continue to fund things at the levels from previous years, that's actually cutting budgets and limiting the ability or the reach of programs K to 20. So there's a lot of nuances in these things, like really getting into what is it, it's not just more money, at least not just more money, just increase funding and raise it with the times. Are there any big questions?
I think that extending technology, so that one, it is worth also pointing out, and again, it's hard to be experts on everything, but I will tell you, there's policy that guides all of this. So when we were out, I think it was 2 years ago, in DC, a lot of the senators, because they work in rural areas, they were working on broadband access issues, and policy related to broadband access. So, the way again, trying to get people on board to your cause, if you pay attention to broadband access, now they may not be advocating it for English learners, but they're advocating it for rural areas. Well, great, it also helps your English learners. So, when you, again, it's broadening your perspective to seeing what they care about. So if you help them see another reason why an issue they care about is going to be positive, it benefits them, it benefits you, and it benefits your students. So. And again, I wish I could find, but if you search like broadband expansion policies in rural areas, you'll probably find the legislation on that.
And a lot of it is that, at least in the rural communities in Kansas, it's called the last mile legislation, where it's very cost prohibitive for businesses to go out and have that last mile of line put in. Well, that's where my families live. My students don't live, in these, not all the English language learners live in Kansas City, Kansas, and Wichita, Kansas. They live in these rural areas. And so if they can get access to the internet, then they're able to access their legally required schooling, and they're able to contribute better to their local economy.
I guess
get jobs, because
one of the points I think we're making is like we are focusing on a lot of these like really specific things that are kind of either going to, like, maybe not specific, but you need to set aside time to do the research for it a little bit. And that doesn't be a lot, because a lot of what we're talking about is like, go to this thing, look up this act and see how it affects you locally. So like, it sounds like a lot, and then it's like, how do we ever get anyone to change this? But really it's just kind of like, part of that could be educating yourself on that, educating others on that, and then seeing and thinking about, am I ready to call the people who could actually affect change? Or am I ready to be the person who could affect change? It doesn't necessarily have to start with kind of knowing all of this already. It's just kind of like, what do I have to do, right? Where do I go? And that TESOL website is really good.
And that person isn't always your state representative or state senator. It could be, you know, locally, it could be your principal of the building that you work in. It could be the provost of international affairs. It could, you know, there's a lot of calls, a lot of people to be made, a lot of different avenues for advocacy. That, yeah, I mean, it's very daunting, and I think it's kind of fun to call and go on, you know, be on the Hill and run around and do all those fun things. But it's also really fun to see a wheel move just by calling my state rep and saying, hey, have you guys talked about this at all? And just leaving him with that question and keep going.
So 2 other quick things I see in the post-it notes, because I know we tend to get kicked off right on time here. One is creating social and resource support connections for international students. What I think that, you know, one of the things that for our international students that helped us was looking for resources, figuring out how resources designated for one community might also benefit other communities. So this can be like food pantries. This can also be, you know, organizations that you might just reach out to those organizations that are doing social events for other groups and say, hey, we also have these students who really need connection. So some of it is, again, thinking broadly about what else is happening on campus that our students might benefit from, and then really just reaching out to them to create that common connection. Because a lot of times they just don't think about it. It's not that people have ill intent. Some people do, but you know, at least 60% of the people don't truly have ill intent. They're just uninformed, I would like to say. And then the other one, the clear, consistent communication between schools and state. Again, it's often a lack of knowledge. We had an issue here in Missouri that they were going to cut off a certain program, and they didn't realize how it was going to affect our students and our faculty. So I actually just had to call them, email them and say, hey, did you think of this? And they said, no. Again, it's often just that people don't know.
Yeah.
So I think we're about out of time here. So I guess thank you to everyone for coming.
You're all advocates at every, you know, it doesn't always have to be the federal level. Just continue to, you know, it's best practice, and you know it's best for your community, and make sure your voice is heard. And if you need support doing that, reach out to us.
Thanks all.
Yeah, thanks for coming.